has balconies. We know that having, for example, another one of the parameters, we'll talk about it in the session about urban biomass or urban earth, but the green canopy is one of the things that improves more the urban microclimate, and obviously evapotranspiration, hydrometric mechanisms are part of the urban ecology, of the ecology that is produced inside of the city. So you have a lot of plants evaporating water to the atmosphere. The heat urban island effect goes down dramatically. If you have trees that are shading the pavement, you reduce the urban heat island effect. You generate a different airflow inside. You purify the air because basically trees absorb CO2 and so on and so forth. So there is a number of things that we can do easily to improve the microclimate as a whole. The microclimate not only involves air, air is obviously a very important part of it, but it involves water, it involves energy consumption, it involves biomass, etc. So the possibility of thinking about cities as microclimates, as climates, I mean, like, it's almost like, if you think about, this is the opposite of the bubble, the airtight mentality that I was talking about. So the idea that buildings are bubbles where we basically control the air, the temperature, filter the air, and there's a very harsh limit between the inside and the outside, is, I think, the opposite of what we should try to do now, which is to work on the outside, work on the microclimate, so that we can breathe that air, we can bring that air in the inside too. I don't know, you know that no matter how good your air conditioning is, inside of a room like this, the air quality is and no matter how bad the air outside is because of pollution, the air quality that we have inside of the buildings is 10 times worse than so it's much better to be outside than to be inside, even if we have kind of sophisticated filtering systems. So probably the best thing that we can do for cities is to think about how to create a set of parameters using air, using water, using vegetation to improve the microclimate outside.
Another question is, when you could design by applying your parameters, then when did you get simulate some models? It is more what it better than it's more better than left part. When did you get simulate this part?
Well, you know, these drawings that I showed from MIDER are not drawings that we use. We don't have the capacity in the office to use this technology yet. I don't know whether very large offices, I mean, you have to do these things, but even I think very large offices use these tools a posteriori. Like, for example, in London, the environmental regulations for planning permissions are very high, and probably also in Zurich or in some other cities in Germany. The environmental regulations are important, and after you design the building, you go and you put it inside of a wind tunnel and you see whether you have high wind or whatever. So there is an a posteriori modeling of the effects of the building in the urban microclimate. But it is very difficult to do it in a generative way. So all I can say, I mean, for my own experience, there are, I mean, we basically have to rely on general principles that we found through research in general cases. Because we are unable to, I mean, we don't have the tools yet that enable us to incorporate all these measurements in the process of designing, but we know that if we have permeable pavements, or if we have urban canyons that close airflow, or that if we have blocks that are located perpendicular to the main direction of the windrows, we will stop airflow exchange. I mean, airflow exchange is one of the, is maybe the main thing that we can do in order to improve urban microclimates and urban health, because the more air goes through the urban fabric, the more evapotranspiration it produces, the more fine particulate matter is moved quickly out of the urban fabric. So there are these kind of basic principles that we can apply to a master plan. So, I mean, it's like when you design a master plan for a piece of an urban fabric, you know that if you have residential with double double orientation units, then you have better airflow through the unit, and then you probably want to have I mean, it basically is difficult to give you a clear example, because it depends, for example, where the main airflow is happening in a certain location, and that depends on whether there are parks or mountains or so I mean, I cannot give you a recipe. There is no general recipe for these things, but depending on the climate, I think that you can design. I mean, one interesting, or one example that I can give you. I don't know whether it is related to air, but this is also related to yeah, it is related to air. Yeah, you've seen the buildings in Hong Kong, the towers in Hong Kong. Why do you think that they are so corrugated? No. Who can guess? Nobody knows?
They can move around inside the building.
Because they
can move around within the building, connected.
No, the main reason is because Hong Kong is a very hot and humid climate. I mean, Seoul is not like that. Dubai is not like that. So if you look at, there's no, we cannot draw anywhere. Now we cannot draw anywhere. This we can draw there. So if you look at buildings in Hong Kong, they have plans that are like very corrugated. They're literally like this, extruded. If you look at buildings in Dubai, so let's say this is a residential building in Hong Kong, and is, I don't know, 2,000 square meters per floor. If you have this same building in Dubai, it probably looks like this. For, 2,000 square meters also. What is the difference between this and that? The difference is that this one has a much higher facade ratio. So when you have a much higher facade ratio, it means that you have more surface of contact between the inside and outside. In Dubai, you don't want to have anything to do with the outside. The farther away you are from the sun, the more comfortable you are. So it doesn't matter. You have a kind of core, and then this depth is enormous. It's almost like an office building, because you know you're going to be air conditioned all the time. But in Hong Kong, and this has to do, I think, also culturally speaking, the Asian tradition of living is very different from the Middle Eastern. I think in Asia people like to breathe, to be outside, to get light is very important in Asian cultures. In the Middle East, they couldn't care less about it. They don't wanna. They have a different culture. But this exchange of air, it's like a radiator. You know how a radiator works? So it has more surface, so there is more exchange between the inside and the outside. So the reason why towers in Hong Kong end up being like that is because they have a regulation that forces every room in the building to have contact with the outside. Ventilation and air and light. It's a matter of policy. You cannot have any bathroom, any kitchen that doesn't have an exterior interface. So that has to do with ventilation, that has to do with air. It may have partially to do also with daylight, which is also, this is a much more ecological building than that. This requires forced ventilation and artificial lighting. So, this is a kind of simple way in which some of the things that we are talking about in terms of thinking about the building inside, the kind of Le Corbusier section with the floors and people looking and the air going through, and so this kind of exchange between inside and outside is more this model. Although in Stockholm you wouldn't have this either, because it's cold. So the problem with cold climate is, there is a balance, and again we are again talking about not thinking that the buildings are bubbles that have a separate environment from the outside. So if you look at these kind of things, and probably in Stockholm is somewhere intermediate, or in London where the climate is, or in Seoul where climate is most of the, in Seoul, I love the fact that many of these high rises are like that. But you know why that is?
Kind of apartment.
Huh? Y shape. This is south.
Or increase the daylight.
Increase the daylight, basically have more surface of the building that is exposed to south. So in these ones, maybe some areas cannot be exposed to south, but in Korea, this is very important. That's also, it's kind of cultural. Here, the south orientation is super important. The experience I have of working in residential buildings is that people make a big deal out of, and I think they're right. Yeah. But, in Dubai, they couldn't care less. So this thing have to do with sun, with air, with this kind of, and when I say when I say the posthuman city, it's always human. I mean, at the end, is human because it also depends on culture. It depends on these kind of differences that different cultures value the relationship with nature differently. And so they are more concerned with the sun and with the temperature and the air exchange and so on and so forth than others. But finally, let's say even if how can I explain this? Imagine that you are not Korean. You are from nowhere. You don't have Asian traditions of relationship with nature or whatever, no? Which is probably something that that is becoming increasingly common. So you imagine that you don't have. You could optimize. I mean, if you were a scientist and you were trying to design the plan of a building, residential building, 2,000 square meters per floor. And you were a scientist and you were considering daylight and you were considering airflow exchange and you were considering these parameters without any interference from your cultural background for the technology that is relevant in 2030 or 2025. I think that scientifically you could converge into a form that would be like this or like that or like I mean, and it will look different if you design it in Hong Kong, in Seoul, or in Dubai.
If I was a scientist, I could set the shape by which one is more efficient.
For a different climate. So the footprint will be different if you are building in Seoul or in. And I believe that there are scientific reasons beyond the cultural reasons that will make you choose one versus another. And I think that this is posthuman. So once this kind of cultural background, which is very important and is intuitively right, so people in Hong Kong don't want to be enclosed. They know they need to breathe, amongst other things, because when they cook like one of the big issues with Chinese is that the food is very, very strong, and so the kitchens have to be naturally ventilated. People say that if you leave the home without air conditioning for 2 weeks, you get more moss in the shoes. Like, it's so wet and so humid that basically in the moment you disconnect the air conditioning, everything becomes rotten, basically. And so that's why they end up in these things. But it would be so intuitively they know, and maybe they have a culture that has traditionally promoted that kind of closer relationship to nature. But the culture in some ways is a reaction to the environment. I don't think that the culture is, and so at the end I think that they are very measurable, very concrete parameters that you are using when you generate when you decide on what is the air exchange between inside and outside in a building, but also in a city. So I mean, like what I was saying before, if this is the main direction of the wind and you want to increase the airflow, you don't put buildings like that, because what you're gonna get is is basically you're going to block the movement of air in the air canyons. So what you do is basically put buildings like this, so that the air canyon, the urban canyons have a high air exchange rate. So I mean, these are kind of basic concerns of urbanism. More questions? Or what time is it? Is it very late?
No.
I mean, I don't know how you do these sessions generally here. Should I stop?
No.
Nobody else. You are the only daring student.
I have a small question.
Yeah.
If there was a way to power everything to the full extent without polluting the environment, would the bubble building be justified?
That's an interesting question. So you're saying if you have the energy to power everything,
Without polluting,
yes.
could the building, the fully air conditioned and like fans inside so that the air is pretty,
Yes.
could that be justified?
Yes. I mean, I think this is a very important question. Because these things depend on technology. Now the question is, I mean, now people are talking about going back to nuclear energy, and you know, Elon Musk is saying that the amount of sun that falls onto the earth in one day can power the whole. So energy, that will be the third, the kind of Wednesday class about, and I will give you some very good bibliography about that. But I think that it depends. I mean, the bubble mentality or the airtight mentality is very much based on a model of high energy consumption. And right now, the technologies that are available to us say that if we need to produce energy, we are going to pollute the environment. I think that's the truth. I mean, maybe we can potentially use nuclear energy, or maybe we can promote whatever wind energy or solar energy, so that we can entirely replace the energy we are consuming, so that every place is viable as a bubble. I think this is a really interesting question for everybody, and I think it's a question that people like policymakers and politicians are asking right now. So they're saying, I saw the other day on Twitter an interesting tweet saying, an interesting graph where